A tough guy, Big Barry, tried to grab a royal guard's arm. Barry thought his muscles would be stronger than the guard's training. But in one quick move, the guard showed who was really in charge, leaving everyone in the courtyard amazed and quiet. Here's what happened. But before we go on, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to this channel if you respect the royal guards. The late afternoon sun made long shadows across Buckingham Palace's courtyard as Big Barry Johnson pushed through the crowd of tourists. He was big and strong, moving like someone who was used to scaring people. At 6'3" and very muscular, he'd got his nickname in London's illegal fighting clubs, where people often found out too late why they called him the Tank. "Move," he said gruffly, pushing past a young couple taking photos. The woman nearly fell, but her partner caught her. Barry pushed on, his tight black t-shirt showing off his big shoulders, built from years of fistfights and street brawls. A tribal tattoo went up his neck, disappearing into his shaved head, which had scars from many wins and a few losses he didn't like to think about. His eyes, cold and watchful under thick eyebrows, were fixed on the royal guard standing nearby. The guard's red uniform and bearskin hat were very different from Barry's street fighter look. The ceremonial rifle, held perfectly still, showed a different kind of strength than the raw power Barry had gained in rough gyms and back-alley fights. "Well, well," Barry's voice, rough from too many cigarettes after fights, carried across the courtyard. "What's this?" He cracked his knuckles, a habit from his fighting days that always made people nearby jump. A real soldier boy standing all nice and neat. Tourists started to move away, sensing the danger in Barry's attitude, the same feeling that usually came before violence in the places where he'd made his name. A mum pulled her children behind a stone pillar, while an old couple looked at each other knowingly before moving near a palace gate. They stood like they had been in the military before. Barry walked closer to the guard, moving like he was testing the limits, looking for any weakness. The afternoon light shone on the guard's brass buttons, each one perfectly polished, each one representing everything Barry hated about rules and authority. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone in the now quiet courtyard to hear, "I've always been curious about you lot. All that training, all that discipline." He flexed his shoulders, making sure the guard could see the power in his muscles. But what happens when someone really tries to challenge it? The guard stayed still, looking straight ahead, but there was something about him, a subtle readiness that only people who'd been in real fights would notice. Barry, too busy trying to be scary, missed these signs as he got ready to start his show. The scene was set for a clash between two very different kinds of strength, one built in the dark corners of London's fighting world, the other made through military training and honor. As Big Barry Johnson stood tall and took another step closer, the air seemed to buzz with energy, like before a storm. "You ever been in a real fight, soldier boy?" Barry's voice was loud in the courtyard as he moved closer, deliberately stepping into the space around the guard. Not those pretend training games, not those planned parades. His lips twisted into a mean smile. "I mean a proper fight, where there are no rules, no referee, just pure strength." He started to circle the guard, like a shark checking out its prey. The tribal tattoo on his neck seemed to move with him, its dark lines disappearing under his shirt, where more ink told stories of violence, amateur wins, underground victories, and the odd time in prison. 3 years unbeaten in the fighting clubs," Barry announced, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "They call me the Tank because I can smash through any defense, any guard." He emphasized the last word, letting its double meaning be clear. "Broke a man's jaw last month, another one's ribs the week before. All perfectly legal, of course." His laugh was cold. "Well, legal enough." The guard's perfect uniform and straight posture seemed to annoy Barry more and more. In the underground fighting world, such discipline was strange, even a weakness. There, strength was measured in broken bones and bloody knuckles, not shiny buttons and ceremonial rifles. Without warning, Barry threw a punch that stopped just inches from the guard's face. The crowd gasped, but the guard didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show any reaction. This seemed to make Barry even angrier. "Nothing," he mocked, throwing another fake punch from a different angle. "Not even a flinch? Come on, mate, your body must be screaming at you right now." He started throwing quick, fake punches, the kind that had made him famous in the ring. Any normal person would have been knocked down by now. Two older men wearing veteran badges had moved near the palace gates. Their faces, lined with experience, showed the calm understanding of men who'd seen real fights. One touched the medals on his jacket, his eyes never leaving what was happening. "You know what your problem is?" Barry continued, now standing right in front of the guard. "All this." He pointed at the uniform, the rifle, the bearskin hat. "It's just for show. In the real world, my world, there's only one thing that matters. Raw power." He flexed his arms, the muscles rippling under his tight shirt. "And I've got more than enough to prove it." He started throwing more complicated fake punches, the moves that had made him well known in the underground clubs. Quick jabs that stopped just short, hook fakes that whistled past the guard's ear, each one meant to make him flinch. But the guard stayed still, his discipline unbreakable. "Starting to get on my nerves now, soldier boy," Barry said, his voice lower, more threatening. "Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone flinches. Everyone shows fear." He moved even closer, his breath hot on the guard's face. "What makes you so special?" The veteran observers looked at each other, noticing something Barry had missed. The subtle tension in the guard's stance, the tiny shift in his position. Not fear, but readiness. The kind that comes from real military training, from facing real danger in real war zones. "Maybe we need to make this more interesting," Barry announced, cracking his neck, another pre-fight habit that had come before many of his wins. "See, in my experience, when someone doesn't react to threats..." He smiled, showing teeth that had been fixed after too many fights. "That's when you have to get rough." The afternoon sun had moved, casting Barry's shadow across the guard's shiny boots. The crowd had grown bigger now, phones lowered, talking stopped. Even the usual tourist noise had died down, replaced by the nervous excitement of something about to happen. Big Barry Johnson had built his reputation on breaking people, their bodies, their spirits, their determination. But as he got ready to make things worse, he didn't notice what the veteran observers saw clearly. The guard's perfect stillness wasn't the stiff posture of ceremony, but the coiled readiness of a trained fighter. "Tell me something." Barry circled even closer, his movements becoming more rough with each pass. "In all that fancy military training, did they teach you about pressure points?" He tapped his own neck, where a particularly nasty scar marked a win that had nearly cost him his fighting license. "Because in my world, we learn exactly where to hit to make a man fall down." The crowd had thinned, but become more focused, making a loose circle around what was happening. The two veterans had shifted positions slightly, their military training clear in how they kept a good view while staying just outside the possible fight zone. Barry started another series of fake punches, each one more complicated than the last. His fists whistled past the guard's face, close enough for the guard to feel the air move. "You know what we call this in the clubs?" he said, showing a particularly complicated combination. "The fear dance. Because sooner or later..." Another fake punch, this one barely touching the guard's uniform. "Everyone dances." The guard's calmness stayed unbroken, but there was a new tension in the air, not from the guard himself, but from those who knew what real fighting looked like. The veterans' faces had become harder, recognizing the growing danger in Barry's increasingly aggressive moves. Getting really annoyed now, soldier boy. Barry's voice had lost its playful tone, replaced by something darker. 8 years in the clubs, yeah? Never lost a fair fight. He emphasized fair with a harsh laugh, though fair is a flexible word where he comes from. He changed his approach, suddenly moving into the guard's personal space, his face inches from the bearskin hat. "Look at this," he announced to the crowd, all dressed up like a toy soldier. His hand shot out, not quite touching the ceremonial rifle, but hovering dangerously close. "Bet this isn't even loaded. Bet you don't even know how to use it properly." The guard's eyes stayed fixed forward, but something had changed in his stance, a subtle shift that only trained fighters would notice. The veteran certainly noticed, one touching his friend's arm in a gesture of quiet understanding. "You want to know what real fighting looks like?" Barry started showing fighting stances, each one bringing him closer to touching the guard. No fancy uniforms, no silly ceremonies, just pure. He threw a fake combination that ended centimeters from the guard's chest. Unfiltered. Another combination, even closer. Violence. His next move brought his knuckles brushing against the guard's red uniform, the first actual touch. The crowd gasped, but the guard stayed still. This seemed to make Barry even more furious. "Nothing? Not even for that?" He started moving faster, his fighter's grace becoming more like a predator's. "You know what we call blokes like you in the clubs? Walking targets." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Because sooner or later, everyone's guard breaks, everyone's discipline fails, everyone shows their fear. He started his signature combination, the one that had earned him his unbeaten streak. Fake punches and shadow strikes flew past the guard's face, each one meant to make him flinch, but the guard's stillness stayed perfect, his discipline unbreakable. "Right then." Barry's voice had taken on an edge that made several people step back. "Let's see how well that training works when things get serious." He started bouncing on his toes, another pre-fight habit that had come before many of his most violent wins. Because, in my experience, all this discipline, all this ceremony. He cracked his knuckles one last time. It all goes out the window when real strength comes into play. The veterans had moved again, their movements subtle but purposeful. They'd seen this before, the moment when showing off turns to violence, when threats become real. The guard's stance had changed too, though so subtly that only trained eyes would notice. His stillness now wasn't ceremonial, but ready for a fight, the kind of stillness that comes before explosive action. Big Barry Johnson had built his reputation on breaking people's defenses, on finding the weak point in any guard. But as he got ready for his final move, he didn't understand one important thing. The stillness he thought was weakness was actually the calm of a trained fighter, the kind of fighter who had faced threats much more serious than a street fighter with something to prove. The afternoon sun made harsh shadows across the courtyard as Barry got ready for what he thought would be his winning move. "Last chance, soldier boy," he said, all pretend friendliness gone from his voice. Show some reaction. Give me something, or I'm going to have to show everyone here what happens when ceremony meets real strength." The air seemed to crackle with tension as Barry shifted his weight, getting ready for the fight he'd been building up to. What he didn't realize was that he was about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between show and real skill, between street fighting and military training, between threats and true strength. "Time's up, soldier boy!" Barry's voice was firm, making several people flinch. With the smooth movement of a practiced fighter, he suddenly grabbed the guard's left arm, his fingers digging into the red uniform with planned force. "Let's see how well that pretend stance works against some real pressure." The moment of contact seemed to make the air electric. Even the birds had gone quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Barry's grip tightened, his muscles tensing as he got ready to push the guard off balance. The tribal tattoo on his neck seemed to move with the effort, his intention clear, to embarrass this symbol of authority by proving its weakness. "Know what we call this move in the clubs?" His grip shifted, getting ready for the takedown he'd used to end countless fights. "The pride breaker. Because once I lean in..." He started putting on pressure, ready to twist the guard's arm and force him to his knees. "There's only one way this ends, with you on the ground, showing everyone here what real strength looks like." The veterans had gone completely still, their faces showing the calm understanding of men who knew what was coming. One touched his war medals without thinking, a slight smile on his lips. They'd seen this before. Overconfident attacker, trained soldier, unavoidable lesson. Barry's muscles bunched as he got ready to do his signature move. In street fights, this was usually the moment when his opponents realized, too late, why they called him the Tank. When raw power beat technique, when street fighting beat training. His fingers tightened further on the guard's arm to show the difference between show and real fighting. "Last chance to save some face," he said, leaning in closer. "Give up the act now, and maybe I'll let you..." That's when it happened. In the clubs, Barry was used to opponents who relied on strength, on lasting a long time, on being able to take a hit. But he had never faced the kind of precise, military-grade response that was about to happen. He had never experienced the difference between fighting for fun and training for survival. The guard's move, when it came, was almost too fast to see. One moment, Barry was getting ready to take him down. The next, his world was turned upside down as his own arm was caught in a grip of steel. The guard's technique wasn't the showy, rough style of street fighting. It was the efficient, devastating effectiveness of battle-tested combat training. Time seemed to slow as Barry's confident grip suddenly became a weakness. The guard's white-gloved hand had moved with perfect accuracy, catching Barry's wrist at exactly the right point to cancel out his strength. Before the Tank could understand what was happening, his arm was being twisted with mechanical efficiency, his own forward movement used against him. The crowd's gasp was lost in the rush of blood in Barry's ears as he felt himself being expertly moved. This wasn't the swapping of punches he was used to. This was a precise, practiced taking apart of his attack. The guard's moves spoke of countless hours of practice, of real fighting experience, of the kind of training that didn't end in prizes, but in staying alive. Barry tried to fight back, to use his fighter's instincts, but each move only tightened the guard's control. He had started this fight thinking he was the hunter, only to find out he was completely outmatched. The guard's grip was unyielding, his technique perfect, his control absolute. The afternoon sun caught the brass buttons of the guard's uniform as he carried out his response, each move precise and purposeful. This wasn't about showing off or proving who was in charge. It was the efficient neutralization of a threat, the kind of response that came from real military training, not street fight clubs. The veterans looked at each other knowingly as they watched. They knew what Barry was about to learn, that there was a world of difference between the controlled violence of street fighting and the deadly efficiency of military combat training. The guard's response wasn't about proving anything. It was about ending the threat with the least force and the most control. Big Barry Johnson was about to find out that his street reputation meant nothing against real military skill. His world of brute force was about to clash with a tradition of disciplined combat that went back centuries, and the lesson was going to be both quick and unforgettable. The guard's response was a perfect example of military efficiency. In one smooth movement, done with the precision of countless combat drills, he twisted Barry's arm behind his back while also doing a perfect leg sweep. The move flowed like water, a combat technique improved over centuries of military tradition and made stronger in modern battles. Every part of the response showed real training: the angle of the arm lock, the precise use of pressure, the perfect balance kept throughout the move. Barry suddenly found himself in the air, his world spinning as the guard's sweep took his legs completely out from under him. For a man who was proud of being unmovable, the feeling of helplessness was both strange and terrifying. The leg sweep, combined with the expertly applied arm lock, sent him crashing to his knees with controlled force. His face was twisted with a mix of shock, anger, and the dawning realization of what was happening. As his knees hit the courtyard stones, the guard kept perfect control of his arm, moving smoothly into a textbook hold that cancelled out every bit of Barry's street-fighting strength. The hold was proof of real military training, not designed to hurt or punish, but to control with maximum efficiency and minimum force. What the— Barry's words were cut off in a grunt of pain as he tried to resist, only to have the guard adjust his hold with perfect precision. Each try to break free was met with small adjustments that increased the pressure, showing a level of skill that made Barry's street-fighting experience look like child's play. The guard's control was total, each move planned not to cause injury, but to keep complete control of the situation. Allow me to explain the difference between showing off and real fighting skill. The guard's voice had the quiet authority of someone who had faced real battles, not pretend fights. His grip stayed steady, professional, neither cruel nor too harsh, just efficiently stopping movement. The white gloves of his uniform stayed clean, even as they did the hold with perfect accuracy. This uniform isn't a costume, and this isn't a game. Every part of our training is based on real fighting experience. Barry tried to push upwards, trying to use his fighter's strength to get to the raw power that had won him so many underground fights. The guard's response was immediate and decisive, a slight shift in pressure that sent pain through Barry's shoulder, forcing him back to his knees. This wasn't the rough swapping of blows he was used to in the fighting clubs. This was the scientific use of force, the kind taught to soldiers who needed to control situations without causing unnecessary harm. Each move was planned, each response measured, showing the big difference between street fighting and military combat training. "In your clubs," the guard continued, his voice staying calm even as he kept perfect control, "you fight for sport, for pride, for reputation. We train to protect, to serve, to defend. The difference isn't in strength, it's in purpose. Every technique we learn, every hold we master, serves a bigger purpose than personal glory." His words carried the weight of real battle experience, of training that went far beyond the showing off of underground fighting. The veterans watched with professional approval as the guard showed textbook restraint technique. One nodded slightly, his war medals catching the light as he recognized the same training he'd had decades ago, still being done with perfect precision. They understood what Barry was learning the hard way, that real military training was in a completely different class from street fighting. Your underground reputation, your street fighting wins, they mean nothing here. The guard's words cut through Barry's struggles like a knife. The hold stayed steady, adapting to each attempt at resistance with smooth efficiency. This isn't about who's stronger, it's about discipline, control, and the responsibility that comes with real training. Every move we make, every technique we use, is backed by years of improvement and real-world use. Barry made one final attempt to break free, trying to twist away from the hold with all the strength that had made him infamous in the underground clubs. The guard's response was almost casual, a slight adjustment that sent another jolt of pain through his arm, a reminder that he was completely at the mercy of someone whose training was far better than his. The guard's technique showed no strain, no effort, just the smooth use of well-practiced control. 8 years unbeaten in your clubs? The guard's voice carried no mockery, just a statement of fact. The words were followed by another precise adjustment of the hold. I've spent that long learning to protect everything this uniform represents. The discipline you make fun of, it's what allows me to control you without causing serious harm, despite your best efforts to start violence. This isn't about proving who's stronger, it's about showing the difference between wild force and controlled power. The crowd watched in amazed silence as Barry, the Tank Johnson, terror of the underground fighting world, was held still by the very ceremonial figure he'd tried to embarrass. The guard's stance stayed professional, his control absolute, showing no signs of strain despite Barry's continued resistance. Each move was a demonstration of the big difference between street fighting skill and professional military training. "Perhaps now you understand," the guard continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced real combat situations, "that true strength isn't about threats or violence. It's about control, discipline, and the wisdom to know when and how to use force." His grip stayed steady as approaching footsteps announced the arrival of palace security, the hold never losing its precision. "Your clubs may have taught you how to hurt people. Our training teaches us how to protect them, even from themselves. Every move, every technique, serves a purpose bigger than personal glory." Police officers appeared at the edge of the crowd, quickly moving in to take control of the situation. The guard kept his hold with unwavering precision until they were in position, then did a perfect transfer of control, stepping back with military precision as Barry was secured by the authorities. The changeover was smooth, professional, showing yet another part of real military training, the ability to work seamlessly with other security forces. "You bloody—" Barry started to spit out a threat, but the guard had already gone back to his post, his stance returning to ceremonial perfection, as if nothing had disturbed his watch. The only sign of the fight was a slight adjustment of his white gloves. Every move precise and purposeful, every action showing the combination of ceremony and skill that defined the Queen's Guard. The afternoon sun caught his brass buttons as he stood at attention once more, his posture perfect, his discipline unbreakable. He had given his lesson, not through words or showing off, but through the controlled use of real military skill, a demonstration of why ceremony and tradition were backed by genuine ability. As the police officers led Barry away, his stream of threats and curses echoing off the palace walls, the guard stayed at his post, returning to his ceremonial stance with the same unwavering discipline he had shown before the fight. The setting sun glinted off his brass buttons, his shadow stretching long across the courtyard stones that had just witnessed a powerful lesson in true strength. "You'll regret this!" Barry shouted over his shoulder, still trying to keep up his tough image, even in handcuffs. "I've got people who—" His words were cut off as the officer guided him firmly towards their waiting vehicle, his underground fighting reputation doing nothing to impress the representatives of real authority. The two veterans looked at each other knowingly before leaving, one touching his war medals one final time. They understood what Barry had failed to grasp, that beneath the ceremonial exterior of every Queen's Guard lay the steel of genuine military training, ready to be used with precise efficiency when needed. The guard's eyes stayed fixed forward, his posture perfect, the only sign of the recent event being a slight adjustment of his uniform. The crowd began to leave, parents explaining to their children in quiet voices about respect, dignity, and the difference between those who show strength and those who truly have it. As the afternoon light faded over Buckingham Palace, the guard stood as he always had, as others would after him, a living symbol of discipline beating brute force, of tradition backed by real ability, of ceremony supported by substance. The incident had lasted barely minutes, but its lesson would echo far longer. That true strength lies not in the ability to scare, but in the discipline to control, protect, and serve with honor. What defines real strength? Is it the raw power to control others, or the discipline to use force only when necessary and with perfect control? Today's meeting between a street fighter and a royal guard showed that True strength often lies not in how much force we can use, but in how well we can control it. As you think about this story, consider when you've seen strength shown through restraint rather than aggression. Have you seen moments where discipline beat brute force, where training and control proved more powerful than raw strength? Remember, these guards stand as living symbols of something bigger than themselves. Behind their ceremonial duties lies real training, real ability, and a real understanding of what it means to have power while keeping control. If this story made you think, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss an update. And don't forget to share this video with friends who might like its message.